It's trade deadline day, and the Orioles are making moves. And just as I go live here on Tuesday afternoon, the O's have made another move. Trevor Rogers is an Oriole, and apparently Eloy Jimenez is an Oriole. We'll break it all down coming up on this live trade deadline episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, July 30th, 2024, and welcome into a live edition of the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. We thank you so much if you're joining us here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We've got a whole lot to talk about. It is 5:46 p.m. Eastern Time. The trade deadline in 2024 is 14 minutes away. I want to apologize off the top. My voice is slowly coming back. I've been struggling with it a bit, but at this point, not 100%. Probably going to be drinking a lot of water and Powerade throughout this show to get through it, but we've got a whole lot to talk about coming up on this episode, which is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb and use code all lowercase lockedonmlb for a first deposit match up to $100. So here's the thing. This episode was supposed to be, we talk about the Trevor Rogers trade, and, maybe the Orioles make some sort of move, probably for a reliever right before the deadline that we chat about. But there is one thing we got to get to right now, and that is the Orioles traded for Eloy Jimenez. That is right. Eloy Jimenez, who was once a budding star in the middle of the Chicago White Sox order and has had a couple of injury issues since then, is now a Baltimore Oriole. Fans wanted a big righty bat to add to this lineup. Well, they certainly got it in Eloy Jimenez, 27-year-old, quote-unquote, outfielder who, you don't really want to play him out there in the outfield. Now, the deal that he initially signed, the cheap 6-year extension with the White Sox, took him through the 2024 season, but he is not a rental. Eloy Jimenez actually has 2 more years left on this contract as club options. So essentially, the Orioles can choose whether or not they want to bring Eloy Jimenez back for the 2025 season and then the 2026 season. Kind of doing a live look here on how much those options cost for Eloy Jimenez. And am I not going to get the information at all? It seems like I am not going to, at least at this point. But either way, he's got club options, so it is really up to the Orioles whether or not they want to bring him back after this year. Now, in terms of what he's done this season, when he's been on the field, it has not been very good. 65 games, 249 plate appearances. Jimenez has just an 80 WRC plus. He's having his worst offensive season of his career, hitting just 240 with a 297 on base, 345 slugging on the season. 7% walk rate is kind of usual for Eloy Jimenez. He does also have his lowest strikeout rate of his career, just 18.9%. But that slugging percentage at 345, the isolated power at 105, that is way, 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 way down from what you are used to seeing from Eloy Jimenez. And this is kind of an interesting trade because he's not the guy he used to be with the bat, and he's still never going to be the guy that plays a good defensive outfield. So your question kind of becomes, okay, what are you getting in Eloy Jimenez? Well, you go back to 2022. This is a guy who had a 143 WRC plus and hit 295 in 84 games despite injuries. In 120 games last year, he had a 105 WRC plus, and you look through his career at a 138 in 2020, his first big league season, 2019, he hit 31 home runs. Like, it is serious power from the right side of the plate, but with the injuries that he has sustained, the question is, can he still do it? Now, Jimenez has been very good against lefties this year, as he has in his career. Only 50 plate appearances, but he's hitting 304 against left-handed pitching. But the issue is just kind of, he hasn't been the same hitter since he got hurt, and there was that weird situation where he got injured and the White Sox hung his jersey from the dugout. That was a funny one. But Eloy Jimenez is, again, not the player he used to be. This is more of a platoon bat for outfield and DH than it is anything else. Now, we are still awaiting the return of this Jimenez trade, so we will kind of see. But again, he is not exactly the same player. Now, his club options for 2025, 16.5 million, and for 2026, it's 18.5 million. So he would really have to turn things around for the Orioles to pick up either of those options. That's pretty expensive for a player who's not performing very well. So I don't think this is actually going to be a big return. I don't think the O's are going to give up a lot to get Jimenez, because if you look at it, he's kind of like a rental in that way. Now, he was still hitting the ball hard, 51% hard hit rate, one of the best in baseball, 92.4 mile per hour average exit velocity for Eloy Jimenez this year. He can't run. He can't really play the field, but he's striking out less. He's chasing less. His bat speed's still pretty good. He's still squaring up the baseball. He just, I don't know. He is not impacting it with the power he used to, but his exit velocity is the best of his career on average. And the hard hit percentage is the second best of his career on average. So maybe the Orioles see something here where they're like, you know what? We can unlock him and potentially get him back to the Eloy Jimenez of old. Now, he's missed time this year with injury too, but he is back and he's hitting the ball really, really hard over the last few games. And so maybe, just maybe, the Orioles have found a cheap option to add a right-handed bat to this lineup, which we know has kind of been missing a right-hander. And this could be a guy who is sneaky and helps the Orioles down the stretch. Now, we're going to push the Eloy trade to the back end of the podcast. Now, Francis Romero, who does a pretty good job reporting on this stuff, says the White Sox will receive a low-profile prospect for Eloy Jimenez, and the Orioles are basically going to take on Jimenez's money. As I mentioned, he has those big options. He is due a total of about $14 million this year. So you prorate that. He's due about $7 million. Seems like the Orioles will pay the entirety of the rest of the $7 million on that contract and make sure that the White Sox aren't on the hook for any of his club options either. And again, a low-level prospect. This is a very low-level buy for the Orioles. And again, he is just kind of a platoon bat at this point in his career, but he's got the stuff down there to be much more than that. Let's now talk about what we really wanted to get to on this live episode. And until the O's make another trade before the deadline, please, if you're in the comments, let me know, hey, first of all, what the return is for Eloy Jimenez, and B, because I can't check Twitter and do the podcast and a million other different things, let me know if the O's make another move, because I'm sure they're still trying to find a reliever. The Marlins are still making trades. Maybe they can make a deal there. But let's talk about Trevor Rogers, the first deal the Orioles made with the Marlins today, as they picked up Trevor Rogers, sending Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers over to Miami. So first, who is Trevor Rogers? Well, he is a 26-year-old left-handed pitcher who's not a free agent until after 2026. So we'll get him for the rest of this year, plus next season and the following season. He also has minor league options remaining. So just in case things go poorly, they could send him to AAA. Hopefully that is not the case. He was the Marlins' first-round pick out of high school in 2017 and debuted in the majors with the Marlins in 2020. That is the only team that he has played for in his big league career so far. And he made 7 starts in 2020, was pretty solid there, and then really started to turn it on during the 2021 season. In 2021, for Trevor Rogers, he was quite honestly fantastic that year for the Marlins. Made the All-Star team, finished second in Rookie of the Year voting, 25 starts, 133 innings, and had a 2.64 ERA, had a fairly low walk rate, had a really good strikeout rate. He was honestly fantastic that year. And the Marlins thought, okay, we've got another ace of the future in Trevor Rogers. And then things did not go in the same direction. He came back in 2022, struggled with a couple injuries, and posted a 5.47 ERA at 107 innings, missed the end of the year with a lat injury, came back and was pretty good in 4 starts in 2023, and then he suffered some sort of biceps injury, then he had a lat issue, and after 4 starts, he was done for the entirety of the 2023 season. But he did come back this year. He returned to the Marlins, and he returned to their rotation, and he did start to at least be healthy. He has made all 21 of his starts this year, and in 105 1/3 innings, he has a 4.53 ERA with a 4.42 FIP and a 4.57 xFIP. For Rogers, it's an 18% strikeout rate, the lowest of his career. It's a 9.7% walk rate, the second highest of his career. So it's not the greatest stats you're looking at on the board. A 316 BABIP means he has been a little bit unlucky, and it's a really solid 47% ground ball rate for a guy that throws a whole lot of sinkers. But there is a couple of different things that are going to concern you about Trevor Rogers. First is the fact that the fastball velocity has basically been going down every year. That is certainly not what you want to see from a guy who is still 26 years old. When he came up in 2020, he averaged 94. In 2021, he averaged 95, as he did in 2022. Then last year it was down to 93. And this year, 92.0 miles an hour is his average fastball velocity. And it continues to go down. Now, in terms of the pitch mix for Rogers, going to show it right here on the screen if you are watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. And thank you if you are joining us live. Here is the pitch mix for Trevor Rogers. It is a 4-pitch mix for the 26-year-old lefty. It's a 4-seamer, a sinker, a changeup, and a slider. 4-seamer, 33%, sinker 23, changeup 23, slider 21. He mixes pretty evenly. His best pitch has always been his changeup. For some reason, it's his third most used this year. It's not getting as much swing and miss this season as it usually does, but that is his weapon against right-handed hitters. Now, opponents are hitting 306 against it, but a lot of that is luck. The expected batting average is lower. The expected slugging percentage is pretty low. Guys generally hit it into the ground. They don't hit it super hard. It is still a good pitch for him, but the sinker's been getting clobbered. The fastball gets hit hard. His slider, the shape is changing. Saris had a good write-up about it in The Athletic on Tuesday, that just the shape of his slider is just not the same now, and it's worse, and it's not getting nearly as many swings and misses. And listen, I'll just throw it all at you at one time. Here is Trevor Rogers' Baseball Savant page. That is a whole lot of blue on there, except for extension down the mound and ground ball percentage. That is generally not what you want to see from a starting pitcher you are grabbing. So you hear all of this and you're saying, okay, Connor, why in the world would they go and get this guy, Trevor Rogers? Well, he's not a huge splits guy, which is good. It's not like righties completely crush him. He's averaging about exactly 5 innings per start, which isn't great, but he's been much better as of late. In his 9 starts since June 9th, he has only allowed more than 2 runs one time, and that was 3 runs in that start. He's got a 3.17 ERA in those last 9 starts, and it's still, some walks and not a lot of strikeouts. But the changes he has made, you're looking for, okay, is it just luck or is he making any changes? Not a lot under the hood has changed, but his pitch mix has changed. He has thrown more 4-seam fastballs in these last 2 months than he had previously. And opponents hit just 185 against the 4-seamer in June and are hitting just 154 against his 4-seamer in July. He's also throwing less sinkers and going more 4-seam fastball plus changeup as his 1-2 punch. And those seem to be his best 2 pitches right now. So at the very least, he identified what his best 2 offerings are. He's gone to them a lot more, and it's led to more success in the last 2 months. What I think the Orioles would do: throw less sinkers, throw more 4-seamers, throw more changeups, throw the 4-seamers up in the zone, throw the changeups down. He could be a 2-pitch pitcher for all I care to get the best out of him. His changeup has one of the best stuff pluses of any changeups in baseball. It's a really good pitch, has the 12th most vertical movement of any changeup in the majors. That is certainly a weapon for Trevor Rogers, and I think he can use it. And again, I'm not saying he's going to be some ace, but this is still a solid pickup for the Orioles. So let's talk about, where does he fit with the O's? What role does he play both in the regular season and potentially the postseason as well? We will get to that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by SupplyHouse.com. You can get supplies from the site that's made for the skilled trades, SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com is the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Shop a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands and get your order delivered right to your door with fast shipping from coast to coast. And do you need help with an order? You can get expert support and industry-leading service from the friendliest folks in the business and talk to a real person every time. Pros in the skilled trades can get a competitive edge by joining SupplyHouse.com's free Trademaster program. Every Trademaster gets access to a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. So join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from their free membership at SupplyHouse.com/TM and order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from anywhere with just a few clicks at SupplyHouse.com. So if you are watching on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I thank you all so much for joining us for this live trade deadline edition of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Trevor Rogers was the addition for the Orioles earlier in the day, getting the left-handed starter from the Marlins for Connor Norby and for Kyle Stowers. And then right before the deadline, the Orioles added Eloy Jimenez, the right-handed hitting outfielder from the Chicago White Sox. I am still kind of looking for what exactly that return was, but kind of we will see. There is a whole lot of trades just flooding in on the timeline, and it looks like Trey Mago is the return. Yes, Trey Mago, a left-handed reliever for the Orioles in AAA Norfolk, who they picked up in the minor league phase of the Rule 5 draft. It looks like a salary dump. That's what Bob Nightingale is saying. The Orioles are going to take on the rest of, I believe, the $7 million that Eloy Jimenez is owed. And on the other side, the O's will send out a left-handed reliever who is having a solid season, but is, not a gigantic contributor moving forward, I would think, for the Orioles. And they take a low cost, low risk, high reward bat in Eloy Jimenez, who was once an all-star caliber player, or at least hitter at the plate. And he gives them an interesting option, at least at DH against lefties, who could certainly help out the Orioles. And again, if he hits, there are team options for 25 and 26 to bring him back. So we will see if there's any other trades. Again, we are officially past 6 o'clock. It is 6:01 p.m. Eastern time. Jack Flaherty has gone to the Dodgers. There's some other moves being made. This does not mean it's completely over for the deadline. Generally, trades will trickle out until maybe 6:15 because it's paperwork that gets done right before you get to the deadline. So we will see if the Orioles add one more reliever. But let's jump back into that Trevor Rogers trade that we were talking about. Told you kind of who Trevor Rogers is. Now, how does he fit with the Orioles? Well, the number one thing is he absolutely fits in this rotation. At the very least, he is one of the 5 best starting pitchers that the Orioles are currently employing. And right here, shown on the Locked On Orioles podcast here on YouTube, showing you the current Orioles rotation with Trevor Rogers in it. So Corbin Burnes, Grayson Rodriguez, Zach Eflin, Dean Kramer, and Trevor Rogers. You can see their stats right there. It's not the most imposing rotation you've ever seen, but Rogers is better. Rogers is easily better than Cade Povich and Albert Suarez are pitching right now. At the very least, he is a better number 5 starter to slot in there for the Orioles. So that is at least a small upgrade that the Orioles have made at this deadline. Now, what can he do for this rotation? I don't know if he's a playoff starter, especially with him coming in as the number 5 guy, but even then, I think he could help you out in the bullpen in the postseason. Eno Sarris, again, over at The Athletic, wrote about this trade and talked about how he thinks if Rogers gets moved to the pen, he could be a similar pitcher to Trevor Richards, not Trevor Rogers, but Trevor Richards, who, was a starter, then moved to the bullpen and became fully just a fastball changeup guy because those were by far his best 2 pitches. And he was a dominant reliever for a while. Now, Richards is getting older and has had kind of a struggling year with the Blue Jays this year, although he was good enough to get traded to the Twins at today's deadline. But Rogers could be like that multi-inning fastball changeup guy who was really nasty as a left-hander in the playoffs, and that could be good for the O's. But for now, he'll give the Orioles 5 to 6 solid innings most times he goes out there, like he's been doing the last 2 months for the Marlins. But the big thing is the team control is huge. Again, he is signed on a cheap deal because it's his rookie deal through the 2026 season. That's 2 more years after this. The Orioles are without Kyle Bradish and Tyler Wells to start next season. And more than likely, and if it's still possible, more than likely Corbin Burnes signs elsewhere in the offseason. So now at least you have Grayson Rodriguez, Zach Eflin, Dean Kramer, Trevor Rogers, and Cade Povich to be your rotation to begin next year. And that's without making another move. And the Orioles are certainly going to add at least one starting pitcher in free agency. You have that starter take over the place that Povich had, and you still have a solid rotation as you wait for Bradish and Wells to return next season. And they could even go even bigger than a free agent that's the number 5. They have the prospect capital. They have the money now potentially from David Rubenstein as they're eating money for Eflin and Jimenez in these trades to go get a better pitcher. But it is huge to have Rogers for multiple years. So yeah, he might be what he is down the stretch, help the Orioles cover innings as a 5-man, move to the bullpen in the playoffs. But then you get him in the pitching lab in the offseason, you try to figure out what's wrong, and you bring him back with a full offseason of working of him and try to get back to the all-star level of Trevor Rogers we saw a few years ago when he joins the rotation again in 2025. And at worst, he's a good relief pitcher at some point if he continues to struggle as a starter. Now, I've seen some of these comparisons saying, oh, this is just the Cole Irvin trade all over again. And while there are some similarities, right, it is a left-hander who has been good in the past, but not amazing, and has multiple years of control that the Orioles are trading for. Cole Irvin, never had a season like Rogers had for the Marlins in 2021 when he was an all-star. Irvin, at the time of the trade, does not have the upside that Rogers still has at 26 years old with the stuff he could still potentially bring. And also, Rogers has the stuff that plays up in the bullpen if he has to go there that Irvin really never had, that made Cole Irvin not a great fit in the Oriole bullpen either. In terms of the team, this more than likely moves Albert Suarez to the pen, with Povich going back to AAA after the start Monday where he was the 27th man. The other roster move will be tough. Like Suarez will stay on the roster, but you got to take someone off the active roster to give Rogers a spot. Unless somebody gets an injury, I would think, honestly, there's three options. You have Keegan Aiken and Birch Smith, who both have options and could be sent to AAA, or you could DFA Cole Irvin. I know the Orioles don't want to do it, but at the very least, Trevor Rogers is easily an upgrade on this team over Cole Irvin, and that's kind of a one-to-one look there of a left-handed starter who doesn't throw super hard. They don't want to do that because he's got more team control, but if they think that's the best thing for the team, they might just do it. Now, someone else has probably claimed Cole Irvin just to eat some innings for a bad team down the stretch, so they know they'd lose him, but Rogers is an upgrade, and at the very least, he slots in as this number 5 starter for this team right now. And the thing is I'll be honest about Trevor Rogers. I was not super in on him as a trade candidate coming up to the deadline. I talked about him when I chatted about the starting pitchers available and the guys that the Marlins could trade when I did some of those episodes before the deadline. But I wasn't super in on Rogers because I was very in on Rogers a couple of years ago, talking with our guy Aram Layton about trades between the Orioles and the Marlins. I loved Rogers, but it, hasn't been very good the last couple of years, and there's been multiple different injuries flipped in there for the left-hander, so that concerns you, and that kind of pulled me off of Rogers. This isn't my favorite trade. Of the 4 trades the Orioles made, easily the 2 trades they made Friday for Eflin and Seranthony Dominguez, absolutely over this one. I don't know where I'd rank. I'd still probably rank Rogers over Eloy Jimenez. Not sure how much Eloy Jimenez can bring, but we will see. But either way, it's not my favorite trade that the Orioles made at this deadline, but it does make them better. It is an upgrade on their number 5 starter. You cannot argue after watching Cade Povich and Suarez pitch lately. You can't argue. Like, Trevor Rogers is a better pitcher in the Orioles number 5 spot, and it gives them at least 5 real major league starters as they go down the stretch this season. But it's not, the sexiest name that the Orioles have brought in. And I do think that has been some of the negative outcry I've seen from fans, but it feels like that the other part of fans being upset with this deal is the fact that the O's gave up Norby and Stowers. And that's what I'll get to finish off this episode. Why, Norby and Stowers might have been a bit of an overpay, but why not technically for the Orioles? Talk about that coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks, to me, the most fun and exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. How you do it? All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And you can turn $10 into 1,000, win 100 times your money on Prize Picks with just 4 correct picks. Watch Team USA rack up the gold medals this summer. Make a Prize Picks lineup of players across basketball, soccer, tennis, and more, and it takes just 60 seconds. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on Prize Picks for a deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. So we finish up this live episode with a look at what the Orioles gave up in their trades today. I mentioned Trey Mago, who goes over to the White Sox in the Eloy Jimenez deal. The Orioles adding Eloy Jimenez as kind of a right-handed platoon bat for maybe a little bit of the outfield and first base, but mostly at DH. And he's kind of a buy low candidate for the Orioles, who was really good in the past, still hitting the ball hard, but the stats have just not been there for him offensively on a dreadful White Sox team this year. And then there is what the Orioles gave up for Trevor Rogers, and that is Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers go to the Marlins in this trade. And a lot of people have been upset about it. But I see this trade really as a win-win for the Marlins and for the Orioles. And I will tell you why. The Orioles get a controllable starter in Trevor Rogers, who certainly does need some work. And I just took you through everything that has been wrong with him this year and why I wasn't super in on him coming into the deadline and why I'm not super in on him now. Like, I don't want him starting a playoff game. He just more helps the Orioles as a 5-man, eat some innings down the stretch, and then they try to fix him in the offseason. But they did desperately need a controllable starter because the injuries going into next year, because Burns potentially being gone, and they just needed a starter this year as well, at least to be a number 5-man. And on the flip side, the Marlins get 2 bats that they can put right into their major league lineup. Stowers and Norby have already had major league experience. I mean, the Marlins would be stupid to not put them immediately in their starting lineup as soon as they get them and play them every day. But Norby and Stowers are also 2 guys who were just kind of going to be blocked long-term and short-term as well in Baltimore. I mean, yeah, Connor Norby was playing the last couple of games since Jorge Mateo went on the injured list. But remember, Mateo and Arias weren't exactly hitting the crap out of the ball. And it took Mateo going on the IL just for Norby to come up and get that shot. It took the second time of it to happen for Norby to get just a couple of games in the lineup. And for Kyle Stowers, like, yeah, he's produced at times, he hasn't at others, but he is currently in AAA right now. The Orioles just did not have a spot for him on this current roster. And as time moves on, that's only going to get worse. Once Holiday and once Jackson Holiday and Kobe Mayo are here for good, there's really going to be no space for Connor Norby. I've said it again, I'm getting on this podcast. I felt that Norby was the most likely prospect to be moved at this deadline because he was just the most blocked guy that was out there, because when you add in Westberg and Henderson to this infield, there's just nowhere for him to play. And then you look in the outfield, I think the Orioles view Heston Kjerstad as a better option than Kyle Stowers. And, they still have Santander. Ryan O'Hearn has been huge. It's kind of pushed back the playing time of Stowers and Kjerstad. And it's just really tough to find a spot for Stowers to get anything close to regular at-bats. So here's how I see it. In a vacuum, Norby plus Stowers, and again, I'm seeing a lot of, Connor Norby, the 5th best prospect. Just remember, Fangraphs in their most recent Orioles list ranked Norby 19th in the Orioles system because of how bad his defense is and how the bat hasn't really taken like another step forward for the defense being that bad. I think the Orioles view Norby and Stowers as more depth guys than everyday starters, and I truly think that's what they are. But still, Norby and Stowers, probably an overpay in a vacuum for the current version of Trevor Rogers. But A, you have to overpay to get starting pitching. We have seen that time and time again. I mean, look at what the Astros gave up for Yusei Kikuchi. I mean, even for any pitching. The reason why the Orioles didn't get Tanner Scott is because the Padres basically traded their entire farm system for a rental reliever in Tanner Scott. That's why the Orioles didn't get him. I mean, they would have had to match that deal. They would have had to put up Mayo or Basayo to get a reliever in Tanner Scott. Like, that was not going to happen. So you have to overpay in every trade. When you are a buyer, buyers always, at least at the time of the trade, looks like they overpay. I mean, the Orioles were lucky that I felt like they didn't overpay in the Zach Eflin trade. I felt like that was really even at the time, but generally these trades are overpays. That is just what happens. And the other thing is, with the talent the Orioles have, these 2 were expendable. Again, they just didn't have that spot moving forward, and other teams can hold that against the Orioles, and that's kind of what they did. You just have to accept that. You say, we're the Orioles. We have so much hitting talent in our pipeline. We have so many guys ready in this infield and in this outfield that although Norby and Stowers could be good players, they also definitely have their flaws, and they're just not projecting to be everyday players, so let's maximize them and go get something. And you can tell the Orioles probably tried to get more out of Norby and Stowers than Rogers, but Rogers is a controllable starting pitcher who's had success in the big leagues. That is a pretty good return for guys like Norby and Stowers. I wish them both well in Miami. That's just the price of pitching at the deadline. So again, if it's Norby and Stowers coming from the Tigers, maybe that's a different sale because they don't have a lot of great hitting prospects and it's less of a system, but coming from the Orioles, that's what you got to pay. And for the O's to go and get pitching, that is what they did. Now, I do think it means that, Heston Kjerstad has a better hold on his roster spot. Terrin Vavra is going to come up for now to replace Norby, but Jackson Holiday, it's been reported by Rock Kabako and others that he will not be in the lineup AAA Norfolk on Tuesday night, which means the Orioles could be planning to bring him to Cleveland with them on their series that starts on Thursday. So it seems like that replacement for Norby on the roster is going to be the return of Jackson Holiday, which will obviously be exciting as well. But that's just my thoughts on the trade. Let me know in the comments what you think there. I know we've seen a lot of negative reaction to this one, but here's the thing. I mean, you are going out there and getting pitching. Pitching is very, very expensive, and that is what it costs. And also, Orioles fans are doing a lot of this, and you got to kind of check yourself here. Overvaluing your own prospects. It happens for every team. Other teams do not view Stowers and Norby the way that Orioles fans do, that's just it. I think there's a good comment from Dan here. Says, yeah, Norby and Stowers were loved by the O's. We fall hard for our players, as you should. It's one of the best parts of being a fan. You can kind of fall in love with the guys who are in your system. You can dream on what they can be. But the reality is, the better chance is they become platoon players rather than, huge time contributors for the Baltimore Orioles. And so you try to cash in. And again, I figure they try to cash in a little bit more than Trevor Rogers, but Trevor Rogers is what was available. And again, you get a controllable starting pitcher that is super, super valuable to a team. Now, the O's did make at least one other minor trade before things finished up, and it was a trade of minor leaguers. How about this one? Kind of intrigued by this one. Billy Cook is on his way out of the Orioles system. Billy Cook, who was up in AAA with the O's this year, pretty toolsy player, plays a whole bunch of different positions, but another one of these guys where it's just like, where in the world is he going to play when he gets to Baltimore? He's already 25 years old. He does have a 120 WRC plus in AAA this season. He has been traded to the Pittsburgh Pirates for high A pitching prospect Patrick Riley. Patrick Riley, a 22-year-old right-handed pitcher who the Pirates took in the 5th round of the 2023 draft out of Vanderbilt. And Riley has been putting together pretty impressive season so far at high A, a 3.38 ERA in 88 innings as a starter. He's got a 30% strikeout rate and a 12% walk rate. We'll talk more about Riley potentially on Wednesday's episode, but kind of interesting. You deal from that AAA level of hitting prospects of guys like Cook, who were going to be part of that 40-man crunch this offseason, may not have had space to put him on the 40-man roster, could have just lost him for nothing to the Rule 5 draft. Instead, you get a really interesting pitching prospect. Kind of like that move from the Orioles right there. I like that prospect for prospect move from the O's. Now, it seems like we've got more trades going on here as I am looking down the list. And all right, well, here we go. How about another right-handed bat for the Orioles as we continue on this live episode here? Austin Slater is headed to Baltimore. Austin Slater, kind of an interesting right-handed bat here. And the Orioles are compiling these right-handed hitting outfielders. They already got Christian Pache. Then they pick up Eloy Jimenez. Now they get Austin Slater. Austin Slater, who was with the Giants earlier this year. He is a rental player. He's on a 1-year, $4 million deal. He was traded to the Reds like 2 weeks ago, maybe. And then with the Reds, he didn't hit at all in 21 plate appearances. And now he has been dealt to the Orioles. I would imagine the return is basically nothing. There's not much you'd have to give up for Austin Slater. But in his career, he has been a lefty masher. 274 average, 122 career WRC plus against left-handers for Austin Slater, who can play the outfield a little bit as well. Not nearly as bad in the outfield as Eloy Jimenez is. So that's nice to see. He's more of a league average outfielder, maybe a little below league average at times, depending on where he plays. But in general, his bat has gone way down this year in lower playing time. But the last 2 years, he's been a really good hitter for the Giants. So that's someone, not really sure how he fits in. Again, maybe we'll get to that on Wednesday's episode. But that was an interesting one. Haven't seen the return yet for Austin Slater. We will kind of hang out here for that one. And then we're seeing even more come across the timeline here. We've got a late report from Kylie McDaniel. This is some of the latest any trades have come in. Seth Johnson is going to the Phillies. Now, the Orioles have already made a trade with the Phillies at this deadline when they ended up going to get Seranthony Dominguez. And wow, the Orioles are going to get Gregory Soto. So they have traded for another Phillies reliever, and that is their final deadline move, is Gregory Soto to the Orioles for Seth Johnson, it looks like. Now, Seth Johnson, who is a right-handed pitcher who came over to the O's from the Astros in the Trey Mancini deal. Johnson, who had really good stuff, but as soon as they made that deal, he got Tommy John surgery, and the Orioles knew that was going to have to happen. Now, he finally made his way back at the end of last year and then started pitching this year. It hasn't been going as good, I think, as the Orioles wanted. He's still been in Double-A. I think the O's thought he'd be good enough to be up in Triple-A at this point. I think the Orioles really did think that Seth Johnson would be a part of their major league, at least their major league bullpen at some point this season. But the fact that he's on the 40-man roster and has been for 3 years and has still not made it past Double-A probably means that he was going to be part of a 40-man crunch at some point. So it does make a solid amount of sense that the Orioles would deal him away. And to go and get him, they end up getting Gregory Soto. Now, Gregory Soto at one time was a fairly elite reliever at the back end of the Detroit Tigers bullpen. Just a couple of years ago, he was getting like elite ground ball rates. He was punching guys out. He had some walk issues, but then he was traded to the Phillies. And last year, 60 innings, 4.62 ERA, but his expected stats were way, way better. Big ground ball guy, got some strikeouts. He got his walks way down last year, which was nice. Now this year, his strikeouts have gone back up 35 and a third innings, and his K rate up to 27%, but his walk rate is up at 12%, which is somewhat concerning. Now, the ERA has dropped to 4.08 for the left-hander, but he is a big-time, it's basically sinker-slider. That is his mix. It's about half sinkers, half sliders for Gregory Soto, and he is also under team control through 2025 as well. So you get a controllable left-handed reliever in Soto. Lefties have hit only 204 against Soto this season, and he's had his struggles, as did Seranthony Dominguez, but kind of another buy low candidate for the Orioles to get a controllable reliever. So, wow, the Orioles end up not making the gigantic deal, but they make a lot of smaller deals at this point. Now, if you're thinking, okay, why did they get Eloy Jimenez and Austin Slater? It looks like to me that Slater, I mean, it'd basically been so bad. This was just kind of a waiver type pickup, and the Orioles may try to push Slater through waivers as well in a couple of days, but I don't think he's really going to impact them. I think Eloy Jimenez is more the impact guy. I think of Slater as just someone they happen to get at this point and is more of just like a candidate to add to their team maybe and come off of waivers. But wow, that was an interesting deadline. I think we are done here. We are at 6:21 p.m., and I do not think there is anything else coming, but the Orioles have made some additions. On the pitching side, it's Zach Eflin as a starter, and then Seranthony Dominguez and Gregory Soto as relievers. And then on the hitting side, they add, the starters Zach Eflin and Trevor Rogers, relievers Gregory Soto and Seranthony Dominguez. Those are four guys who are going to be on their big league team. And then on the hitting side, they add Christian Pache, Eloy Jimenez, and Austin Slater, basically throwing a couple of things out at the wind for a right-handed outfield bat. Most likely only one of them will stick. It will probably be Jimenez, but an interesting deadline nonetheless for the Orioles. That'll do it for this live episode. Thank you so much for sticking with us. That was a whole lot to break down. I'll have another episode of the pod coming up on Wednesday morning. We'll, of course, recap tonight's game between the Orioles and the Blue Jays with Corbin Burns on the mound. But then I'll go more in depth to what exactly the Gregory Soto trade means, a little more in depth for that Billy Cook trade, a little more in depth on Austin Slater and Eloy Jimenez. And we'll talk a little bit more about, hey, just kind of thanking the time of some of the Orioles who were traded away at this year's deadline. But that is coming up on tomorrow's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.